I will be admitting all the attendees for right now. And then Neha, at 12 o'clock, go ahead and begin, okay?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neha Kunte, Chairwoman of ACT, Asian Chamber of Texas. I welcome each one of you to our Day 2 Women's Business Conference 2020. Our leadership team of President Susan Phillips, Program Manager Divya Rao, and our esteemed board members are the strong, solid pillars and foundation of the Chamber. My special thanks to the committee chair, Caroline Kim, co-chair Amy Hofflin, and the team members of this committee for putting this event together, Gloria Mathur, Shago Perkins, and Ann Badmis. We are because of our community partners, members, and sponsors. We would like to thank our sponsors, Dallas Independent Schools Minority Women's Business Enterprise Department, National ACE, Mead Center, and Community Foundation of Texas. Thank you to our community partners, DFW Japan America Society, for their valued contribution. We make conscious efforts to bring the bouquet of great events with brilliant speakers, moderators, and panelists. And today, it is our hope that you not only enjoy, but learn and lead from this event. We celebrate you. It's women like you who defy, who define, who direct, who decode, and who deserves the best of everything. With that, our first panel discussion is about Find Your Civic Voices. And I have the pleasure to introduce our moderator for this panel, Karen Locke. Karen Locke is the Regional Vice President and Associate General Counsel of TIAA. TIAA is a foundation. It's a Fortune 100 financial service organization that is the leading provider of financial services in the academic, research, medical, cultural, and governmental fields. In her role at TIAA, Karen is primarily the interface for the company and its subsidiaries on all legislative, executive, regulatory, and administrative matters of the South and Midwest regions. Her expertise include policy development, regulatory negotiation, lobbying, coalition building, and industry relations. At the company, Karen is active in gender and racial diversity initiatives. She was the former corporate co-chair of the Women's Employee Resource Group Denver chapter and is currently the member of Denver Leadership Council and Dallas Leadership Council. Prior to joining TIAA, Karen was general counsel with a consumer financial company. Before entering into the corporate world, Karen spent over a decade litigating complex business matters, including copyright and trademark infringement, employment discrimination, shareholder and partnership disputes, aviation, and toxic tort. With that, I welcome Karen Locke.
Thank you so much, Neha. And I also want to thank the Asian Chamber of Texas, and of course, Susan and her team for welcoming me to this panel. So I want to just start this off by doing a brief introduction of our three amazing panelists. These women are so accomplished, and I'm just going to hit on some of their highlights, but I encourage you to look them up and engage with them after this particular discussion. So first we have Chi-Ling Tong. She is the CEO and president of the Asian Pacific Islander Chamber of Commerce and Entrepreneurship. So just for short, we're gonna talk about that as the National ACE. Since January 2017, her expertise is domestic and international development with a focus on researching and enhancing the growth of small and minority business enterprises in the global market. In 2017, she received the Distinguished Advocate of the Year Award for the U.S. Department of Commerce and was recognized at the White House. Chi-Ling is a leading ranking official at the Minority Business Development Agency and the Department of Commerce throughout her years in the public service. Her expertise led to her appointment to the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, as well as board of director of the Congressional Awards Board for Young Leaders. Second, we have Madeline Milka. She is the president and CEO of the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies and founder and principal of ARAM Group. She is a nationally renowned civil rights champion with 25 years of experience working in political campaigns and specializes in political and nonprofit fundraising and political training. Madeline has worked on several presidential campaigns, including the Clinton-Gore, Kerry and Hillary Clinton, as well as many high-profile congressional and senatorial campaigns. Her experience is sought after by national groups, including the American Medical Association, the Center for Asian Pacific American Women, and the Vietnamese American Chamber of Commerce awarded her the National Community Service Award for her work in mentoring and promoting Vietnamese American civic participation. And lastly, on this esteemed panel is my dear friend, Tier Suzuki. Tier is the America's Consulting Talent Leader at Ernst Young, and in her role at EY, she is responsible for innovating and leading comprehensive programs, creating a work environment for over 20,000 professionals to grow their careers as well as achieve their personal and corporate goals. Aside from her day job, Tier also serves on multiple boards, which is a full-time job in and of itself. She serves on the board of the Texas Women's Foundation, the Orchid Giving Circle, which we will get to in just a short little bit, the SMU Lyle Engineering School Executive Board, the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, as well as several other national boards. Tier was also a 2019 Presidential Leadership Scholar and has received numerous awards nationally and locally, so we're not going to go through all of those. Please help me welcome these dynamic women to our discussion today. First, let's start off with what the discussion is about, which is civic voice. So let's define what civic is. In the Merriam's dictionary, civic is defined as of or relating to a citizen, a city, citizenship, or community affairs. When you break that all down, it is really about relationship to people and their community. And our community can be about home, personal, work, business, just whatever it is that leads you to have a voice in something that is of importance to you. And how do we use that voice to change the conversation is what we're going to talk about today. And I want this to be interactive, so I encourage all our panelists to jump in with anecdotal stories as well as thoughts that may make this go much more dynamic. So I want to start off with an open question, which is, what is your civic voice and how do you use that civic voice? Let's kick it off with Tier in the corporate sector. Tier?
Thanks, Karen. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you, and Chilling and Madeline. Glad to be on this panel with you, and I wish we could see all of the participants today. But without that, so in terms of my civic voice in the corporate space, but also in the nonprofit arena, I would share that in many ways, I feel like I'm still working on finding my voice, both in the civic realm as well as in my work. But I grew up as a refugee from Cambodia. And so when I was growing up in East Dallas, one of my first experiences in terms of in relation to community service was with an organization called the Blue Dragon Exploring Post. And this is when I was in high school. And the Blue Dragon Exploring Post was started by a Dallas police officer and his wife, who was a middle school teacher. And they started this exploring post in order to keep Southeast Asian teenagers out of gangs. And I was one of them. And within this group, they taught us what it meant to be a good citizen. And so we cleaned parks, we drilled peepholes in apartments to keep the community safer. And that was also where I learned about kind of our US government and what that's about. And I became a US citizen through this organization. So this was my first exposure as a, as a high schooler. And then also in high school, I was part of the Key Club when the Key Club opened up to girls. And this was a service organization. And so I did service community with that as well. And now in my adult life, I have gained much fulfillment in terms of being involved in the community and giving back and helping others, because when I was growing up, I had received a lot of help from others who are kind in the community and nonprofit organizations that serviced, the community. So one example I would just love to share is my involvement with the Orchid Giving Circle, which I know some women on this call is a part of. And the Giving Circle concept is democratizing philanthropy. And it's this idea that to be a philanthropist, you don't have to be a millionaire and you don't have to be a billionaire. Philanthropy just means loving humankind and loving humanity. And so Orchid is a group of Asian women caring and sharing. And our mission is to provide grants to nonprofit organizations that service the Asian community. And to date, we've raised over $800,000 over the past 6 years to support the community. And so I believe that as a business leader in corporate America, we also need to be community leaders and work on the causes that we care about, the causes that tug at our hearts. And by doing that, it brings us, I think, a lot of meaning into our lives. And so both my personal life and my professional life is very much entangled with the work that I do in the community.
Thank you so much, Tier. That's so powerful. And thanks for the great plug on Orchid.
Of course.
Now, let's move on to the nonprofit side. And of course, both ACE and also Madeline's organization are both in the nonprofit, but I want to focus on the business entrepreneur for Chiling and then have Madeline talk about her organization. Madeline, can you go ahead and kind of share what is your civic voice and how do you use that voice?
Sure. Thank you so much, Karen, for moderating today, and to the Asian Chamber of Texas and Susan Phillips and her team for inviting me to participate. And it's an honor to be on this panel with my two fellow panelists. So to answer your question, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies, I know that's a mouthful, so we call it APEX. APEX has been around for 26 years, founded by former Secretary Norm Mineta, who served in both Republican and Democratic administrations. He founded APEX when he was still a member of Congress, representing the San Jose, California area, alongside the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, which we call KPAC. And KPAC is the caucus that is comprised of all of the Asian American Pacific Islander members of Congress in the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. And so we are at an all-time high in representation with 20 members in the Congress. And so APEX is its foundation arm. And basically what we do is we work to increase API representation at all levels of government. So from community service to elected office and to the highest office in the land of president. And now we have the fortune of having a vice president-elect who is South Asian. And so my civic participation started at a very young age. I was actually born in Vietnam. My mother is Vietnamese. My father is of German-American ancestry. We left Vietnam after the fall of Saigon. And so not until after 76, as American citizens, we left Vietnam and came back to the United States. And I was raised in the DC metropolitan area, to which I still continue to live today. And so growing up, I went to a science and tech high school, and I ended up being president of my student body. And this was, in the 80s. And so, as I grew up and continued into my education, I went to college at Tulane in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I was vice president of the student body. And so my executive leadership started at a young age. And so I also, as a young student as an undergrad at Tulane, in my executive leadership position, the entire executive leadership was comprised of women. So the president was a woman from California. I was first vice president from the Maryland area. And then the other vice presidents were from Georgia, a Black woman engineer, a vice president from Nebraska who was in the business school, another business school undergraduate. And so you're looking, I feel that I've grown up with strong women around me all the time, from women who look like me, as well as women who are from different backgrounds and different perspectives and lenses of their personal lived experiences. And so as I continued in my professional career working in politics, I've always been associated with the more moderate wing of the Democratic Party. And so I've worked a lot with business associates and people who have an interest in private-public partnerships. And so being an active citizen itself, those are sort of the values that I bring when it comes to my political work. And so in my nonpartisan capacity as the president and CEO of APAC, what I do is I encourage the AAPI community, and specifically AAPI women, to be active citizens. We all know that we have opinions, and we should utilize them in a way that shows that we are here to be subject matter experts, and to step into that power of knowing how we best take care of our families, our small businesses, our positions in corporate spaces. And those are sort of the things that I think your lived experiences lend this opportunity for you to become on the planning commission, to do things that allow you to actually exercise your expertise that you already own in your everyday life as a professional, that you can then give back in a public service space.
So Madeline, we're meeting for the first time today, so we have something in common. I was also student body president of my high school in Dallas, Skyline High School. So
I just love that it started so early for the both of you. That's wonderful. Well, Chilene, how about you? Can you share what your civic voice is and how do you use that? Maybe a little bit about your journey as well at National ACE?
Yes, absolutely. It's really my honor to serve on this panel. I want to thank Asian Chamber of Texas with all the leadership and the committee members and also participants, and also with my fellow panelists. I really adore all the women here. I am the president and CEO of the Asian Pacific Islander American Chamber of Commerce and Entrepreneurship, also known as the National ACE, and we're so fortunate here is serving on our board. We are a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to serve as a strong advocate of Asian American Pacific Islander business interest and affect a positive change on all issues that enhance and advance the goals and aspiration of Asian American Pacific Islander business owners. And during this COVID-19, Asian business owners had experienced severe damage to revenues. And their revenue were, over 60% lower than they were in the prior year. And the number was from early, summer, but now probably even worse. But I will talk about how National ACE has advocated to help the Asian business on the Capitol Hill. I will discuss that later. But I will share with you why I got involved, this political field. I remember when I was a student, as a foreign student in California, that was like 30 years ago. And I stayed with a landlord. My landlord is very, very good, and she has been very, very nice to me and great lady. But one day I talked to her, I say, hey, as a foreign student, we have been educated. I was born and raised in Taiwan. My government, the government, and also my family invest so much on me. But now I'm coming to America. I really wish I can contribute to this country in the future. And I feel we are kind of new blood to this country. And my landlord, she immediately said, hey, we have so many immigrants coming to this country and they take advantage of our Social Security benefits. And I think she didn't really mean to hurt me, but that really kind of, struck me, say, oh my God, why people are thinking about new immigrant from that perspective. Another incident, my father came to visit me and we met with, had a dinner with a superintendent of a school board. And the wife is very, very nice lady. And they had a conversation with my father. And they asked my father, what do you like about this country? And my father thought about that, and he said, weather. And then the wife asked another question, which part of the country you don't like? My father thought about that, and he said, maybe crime. And then the wife immediately said, you know, Southeast Asian refugee bring all the crime to the United States. So from that on, I realized as an Asian American, we cannot be quiet anymore, because we work so hard. We're willing to give everything to other people, have them to take credit, and we just want to hide into the corner to do our own thing. But that doesn't work anymore in this country. If we don't channel our voice, if we don't tell people our accomplishment, what we have contributed this country, we become invisible. So therefore, since then, I have been very, very focused on to advocate, you know, on the Capitol Hill, and also bring our group to our community together to pass a very important message. Well, things I have mentioned about how AAPI business has been damaged through COVID-19, and we have done a lot of work, but today I will just focus on advocacy. We advocate AAPI business in access to economic called idle loan, and also PPP. And also we arrange, you know, small businesses testify before House Small Business Committee, and meet with a member of Congress like a KPAC, Congresswoman Judy Chu, Andy Kim, to let them know that we really need to help out our business community, because many of them, they do not know the federal resources, and they have a language problem. And then we also combine with, you know, invited Hispanic and Black Chamber to have a meeting like with Senator Rubio, and he is the senator of small business community, the importance of continual economic stimulus for minority business enterprise, and the unique challenge faced by AAPI and minority business. And last but not least, we also, you know, work with KPAC to send the letters to the Fortune 500 corporation to let them know that we need to have more AAPI representation and also minority representation on the corporate high-level officers. So there's a lot of work we can work together to advocate, and we're just fortunate that we have 65 affiliate Asian chamber behind us, so we can have a one voice together to support our AAPI business.
Well, thank you, Chilling. You know, I was taking some notes as you were talking, and there seems to be this kind of dichotomy that I've pulled away from your story. One is that at one point we have kind of the model minority. Do you really need any help? But then you have the opposite, which is, oh, the Southeast Asians bring all the crime. How do you reconcile that? Tia, you and I've talked about the model minority myth before. How do you deal with that, and how do you reconcile that in your daily life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, growing up in Texas as a refugee from Cambodia, my experience is very different from those Asian Americans who are fourth generation or third generation or even second generation. So when I came to the United States in 1981, when I was 8 years old, I mean, my family we were just trying to get on our feet. I mean, we came to this country with nothing. Right. And those of us, you know, here in the Asian community, we understand kind of the differences between, you know, the different ethnic groups within the Asian race. But our majority colleagues and friends don't. And so I think the important thing is you know, continue to help educate that we can't lump all Asians together, you know, and then even within the ethnicities within the Asian race, you know, the Chinese are not all the same. You know, not all Indians are the same. Not all Japanese are the same. And we really need to continue to remind our colleagues and our friends that, you know, we're each unique, and we have our own lived experiences, as Madeline talked about, as well as, some of us need more help than others. Not all Asians are in the Ivy Leagues, and not all Asians are making six figures. And so helping that to educate and also being able to maybe one day have the EEOC disaggregate the data, right? Because right now all Asians are in one bucket. And I know that within my firm, for example, we're increasing conversations about the fact that when we talk about Asians in leadership, we see many more South Asians at the partner level and in leadership, and not as many Southeast Asians. And so what that means is those young people, young professionals who are Southeast Asians, when they look up and they don't see others who look like them or others who have common experiences to them, it's a little bit harder, for them to be able to see themselves at the partner rank or in those leadership roles. And so I think it's incredibly important, and it's incumbent on each of us to do our part to help educate and share our stories, and also share the stories of our friends, who are different from us.
Absolutely. We can't be what we can't see. And I know you and I both were raised in Texas. So I wonder if Madeline has a different perspective, having been on another coast, which is, I would say, at that time, a little bit more progressive in the 80s, even than it is now. So Madeline, what do you think about kind of the model minority dichotomy versus the perception that there are gangs coming out of Southeast Asians?
I echo all the comments that were just made just now, because it's so important for us to really educate those who don't know much about the API community, in that the data disaggregation is so important. We're not a monolith. I think recently in this past election, newscasters and political analysts talked about the Latino community, recognizing that they are not a monolith, I think for the first time. And this is something we've been saying for a very long time when it comes to the API community, that we are not a monolith, and that to recognize the data disaggregation is to also recognize where we have vulnerabilities. And then that also occurs in regards to healthcare, that occurs into our own genetic makeup of our different ethnic groups, because that in itself tells us certain challenges that our communities have with certain diseases that happen. And all of this data disaggregation is only going to provide more information about how you can communicate those vulnerabilities to elected leaders and to the business community. As consumers, we have this ability to also break down this data disaggregation so that we can better communicate services to these different communities. And so the model minority myth is exactly that, and is one that we try to dispel all the time in regards to making sure that people understand that we are 6% of the population, and yet we only have 3% representation at the federal level. When we look at how many elected leaders we have representing us at any legislative body, we are still underrepresented. And so this is still an issue that affects us every day when you talk about public policy decisions that affect a very broad community. And so, even though I grew up in an area that was actually predominantly Black, the most affluent African Americans lived in the county that I grew up in, with the most in terms of postgraduate degrees, standard of living. That is still not something that you would normally talk about in terms of the myth of the Black community. And so I think it's so important for us also to recognize that there are other communities of color that have a lot of stereotypes placed on them. And that when we support one another to say, hey, that's not right, and that is not true, being able to help one another, especially in periods when we have also been in this current COVID-19 situation, at the forefront of so many anti-Asian racist rhetoric. And that is so important for us to have support from our other communities of color, because we've shown up for them. And so data disaggregation and education only helps to dispel that.
Well, I like to applaud the Asian Chamber of Texas because they did actually a couple of months ago have a couple of panels discussing xenophobia and the impact to our community. So I like to really just kind of give kudos to ACT on that. But I want to take that data, that the kind of the importance of data, and turn it over to Chilling, because I think National ACE is doing some wonderful work using data to go back on talking about what our community really needs. And I want to give a few moments and let Chilling talk about the project that's ongoing. And I believe there might be some preliminary data you might be able to share with us. Chilling, can I turn that over to you?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, we are conducting a survey right now. We will be published the report pretty soon in December, early December, how COVID-19 have affected AAPI business, including data we have discussed. But I do want to talk about the model minority, because the Asian American business buying power, the buying power increased about 257% between 2000 and 2017, which increased in buying power for all other racial and ethnic groups in the US. So therefore, AAPI are often referred as the wealthiest ethnic group in the US. So I think both, which can be attributed to both immigration and higher level of educations. So before COVID, we predict by 2022, the purchasing power is about 1.3 trillion. But however, since COVID, this number has been definitely changed. But we have to realize, despite of this progress, Asian Americans have experienced the greatest income equality of all ethnic groups in the US. The 90% of AAPI earns 10 times more than the 10% of AAPI earns, only like $12,000 per year. So as both Tears and Madeline mentioned, we really support the research that focus on, all different kind of thing about AAPI, and also especially the income equality with AAPIs. So if we look at the leadership, as Madeline mentioned, like senior executive service, we have a 6.7% of the population. But like a federal government, senior executive service, like only 4%. And like a Fortune 500 board seats is only 3%. And Fortune 500 CEOs only 2%. And corporate office is only 0.3%. A partner lawyer is 3%. And Congress members, we are so fortunate we increased a couple women leader there, including 2 Republican Congresswomen, Yang King from Orange County, Los Angeles, and San Bernardino County, and also Michelle Steele from Orange County. So we increased few members, but it's still, like a 3.8%. And state legislator is well below 2%. So if we think about that, it's just incredible people talking about when we are, we are probably some kind of accomplishment in some place, but for leadership role, both in public and private sector, we're way behind. And talking about, anti-Asian sentiment, it really hurts our business. If you look at JP Morgan report, the balance of the Asian business declined 22% in early April, and now it's even worse. 60% of the restaurant, Asian or Chinese restaurant, and ceased the operations. And it just overall, the severe damage to cash balance and revenue, therefore they really need more financial assistance to fully recover. But however, because their language barriers, some of them they just cannot read in English. And then therefore we put our website is smallbusiness.org for have all the CARE Act information over there to show people how to apply. But even as the raw data we receive from our survey, a lot of people, a lot of API business, they still do not know. And I think the fear for Asian business, if you look at some company, they after the first wave, they think, oh, we can reopen our business, and then riots come. Some of them, they got a tremendous damage. So we just feel so sad, and they are afraid because people feel virus is from China. So when they have that kind of Chinese face, they are afraid they will relate to them to the virus. So there are so many things we have to work together. So I'm so appreciate Asian Chamber of Texas to address this important issue today.
Well, we all kind of touched upon it, and it's hard to ignore what just happened at the beginning of the month, right? So the election happened, and all of you mentioned about Asian Americans needing to come out and really speak up, and we certainly did. So a national study that just came out post-election show an increase of 310% in AAPI early voters, from 4 million this year, from 2020, compared to 1.25 million in 2016. And in battleground states like Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, and North Carolina, the AAPI vote also was a driver in making the change. So I want to ask, do you believe, Madeline, that having Andrew Yang, an AAPI, as well as VP-elect Kamala Harris, who is South Asian, running for the presidency, was that the big driver, or do you think that there was something else as an undercurrent that really drove up the turnout?
So also want to include Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, because she also ran for president as well from Hawaii. And so I think all of that are factors in the beginning of the primary process. Primaries themselves are very different campaigns than the general election. And so you get different types of a voter in a primary than you do in a general. And so the more APIs who are on the ballot, it also drives API participation. So studies have shown that, and that also doesn't mean just on that level at the presidential level. It also includes if you're running for local office. And so this cycle, we had over 300, close to 350 candidates run for office who are API, which is a record high. And we probably have and we're still counting because some of these races have not yet been called, 150 projected winners across the different various levels of government. And so what you're talking about is every time an API's name is on the ballot, they are bringing out their own constituency and network of people. So take, for instance, Congressman Andy Kim, who is a US representative in New Jersey. He has probably 2% Asian Americans in his district. And so that doesn't mean that the Asian Americans who identify with him as being a Korean American weren't going to support him in some way across the country. They want to participate, seeing that they have a Korean American running for office. And so those are sort of the things that are the outlet to which civic participation happens when you have Asian Americans on the ballot. And so, yes, it absolutely drives participation when you have names on the ballot for the presidential ticket. But then you also have to see how important it is for us as a community to also participate in those local elections, because those local elections also have repercussions and consequences when you vote. So, whether or not it's how your roads, your taxes are being spent, how your urban development is happening in your planning commissions. And so all of those things down the line really matter when you look at Asian Americans who are running for those seats. And so state legislative wise, that's important too, because those are the people doing your state work, and then your local elections, your mayors, your city council members. So all of those things are so important. And I know in Texas, you have judges that are elected. And so those sort of things are important when it comes to seeing Asian Americans participate, not just in where they geographically live, but also when they see themselves in other candidates across the country, and recognizing that that's how a community grows its political influence and makes a difference as a margin of victory for so many elections.
Chilling, you spent a lot of time in the Capitol, and I see that your background is of DC. Have you seen a big trend from your time in the Hill to now in terms of Asian participation? And specifically, have you seen a particular demographic group? Is it more related to age, or is it the South Asians or the Southeast Asians? Just trying to understand from where you sit when you were at the Capitol.
Yes, absolutely. I cannot agree more with Madeline's comments. And I think this is very, very important for us to involve, politics or public policy. And to run for office is really, really the key. And we have like a KPAC, and Congresswoman Judy Chu has been, leading the KPAC to work with all different caucus, and she has done fantastic job. And also we have Grace Mann as vice chairman of the Democrat Party. So I think they all play very significant roles. And now, as I said, we're so happy we have 3 Asian American Korean women, two from California, one from Washington, Marilyn Strickland, and they are all born in Korea. So it's just amazing as their family an immigrant to this country, and they're able to get into the to be a member of Congress. And the thing make me happy is because primarily all the caucus are Democrats, except the one Amata Rich Wagon from Samoa is Republican. Now we have 2 Republican AAPI congresswoman. I think that's very important for us. We represent both, and then we'll be able to speak on AAPI issues. And for me personally, I have involved, different organization, nonprofit, like International Leadership Foundation, promote civil awareness and public service for college students to intern at the federal government. And the purpose for that internship is not want them to be a public servant in the future. They have to understand what is a public servant about, and then what's a federal agency, and also Capitol Hill. So in the future, when they become their professional, they can still understand how public policy work. If they are a doctor, they could be the administrator of a hospital. They have to understand health issues. All others are related. Maybe the teacher could be the principal of a school or university. So this is so critical for us. And for also, we have another program called Next Gen program. We gave young entrepreneur, have them involved, to teach them. We just have a level up 2020. We have 400 young entrepreneurs to train them how to go through the in this challenging time. But also they have to have a civil minded. So we have so many organizations, even like a tier, they just had their big conference on women, like a 2020 women on boards, and they're just done fantastic job to promote women. So I feel all the organizations we're working together, just want to people involved more. The progress is still very slow. I tell you, it takes like 20 years or more to understand how the system works. People, if they just walk in, it's very hard.
Well, thank you, Chilling, because you and I must be sharing the same wavelength, because I want very much to talk about TIER's kind of service on 2020 women on boards, because we just finished that in the Dallas, and also the national conversation happened last week. TIER, can you talk a little bit about why that organization resonated with you? And how do you see that tying in with the Asian American representation on the corporate board level?
Absolutely, yes. So it's been such an honor for me to work with Tracy Doi, who's the CFO of Toyota, also an Orchid sister, also on the National ACE board, on 2020 Women on Boards. She and I, along with the CEO of Carcon Industries, Arcelia Acosta, we hosted, there you go, thanks, Chilling. We hosted the Dallas Conversation on Board Diversity event earlier this week. And we had over 600 participants, and these are corporate board members, C-suite executives, community leaders, and other senior executives, all working towards the same mission of increasing the representation of women on corporate boards. And in particular, 2020 Women on Boards focuses on the Russell 3000 companies. And so just some stats. Nationally, we're at 22.6% women on boards. In Texas, we're 20.1%. And in Dallas, the Dallas companies were 22.3%. So a long way to go. But the reason why I have chosen to spend my time and energy towards 2020 Women on Boards is because I believe for us to kind of increase diversity and representation as well as inclusion in corporate America, we need to have leaders, more leaders who are diverse in the leadership roles at the decision-making table. Because when that happens, then we'll see leadership at all levels, right? And for right now, we don't have that. We have many professionals who are at the lower levels, and then you get less percentage when you get to the manager and senior manager, and then at this executive level, a very small percentage. I just looked up on Google just recently the number of Asian American CEOs in Fortune 500 companies, very small, 2% or less. In terms of Asian Americans on boards, Fortune 500 boards, about 8% is what I'm seeing in the data here. And so we have a long way to go in terms of getting Asian Americans more represented at these senior level roles. And if we need to do both, work from the bottoms up as well as from the top down. But we'll move much faster if we're able to get people, Asian Americans at the top, and then their way of thinking would be different, and it'll help to bring up and lift up other Asian Americans at all levels as well.
Well, I vote that you run. I mean, I'm like Tier Suzuki President 2024. So that's what we need to see more of.
Why
Madeline,
not, right?
Yes, absolutely. Madeline, how do you, what advice would you give for Asians looking to run for office? I mean, I know that's your level of expertise, but we have record numbers, but we're still not represented at the level that we should be. What kind of words and advice would you give someone who is considering running for office?
Well, I would encourage them to join the Apex newsletter that we have that comes out once a month. We run a variety of programs that allow you to learn leadership skills on how a campaign works, because a campaign is very different than a lot of things in life. And it's very particular in terms of the work that you have to do to be successful on a campaign. I kind of, the analogy that I use for it is kind of like creating a small business every 2 years if you're running for Congress. And so you have to raise money and you have to put together a campaign plan. It is basically a startup every 2 years. And so those people who have, a business background, you can apply some of that. However, there are very different things when it comes to being a candidate and working on a campaign in terms of time management and expectations. And so I highly recommend that you go to apex.org to sign up. We have leadership trainings. NBC News did a story on us right after the 2018 election, really highlighting the work that we do, that we are the City Council to Congress organization that helps to elect people into office. And so that's really our goal, is to make sure that Asian Americans feel that they have the resources and tools to be able to do that. And I have a very specific project in my heart that I created while I started at Apex, called the Women's Collective. And that is purposefully to create community for API women so that they can run. And it is a network of women who are interested in running themselves or supporting an API woman to run for office in the future. And it's to give you skills and resources and a network to lean on to ask, how do I do this? And if you are the only Asian American woman in your state legislature because you did it and now you are a person of one, I hope to connect you to other single, lonely Asian American women in their state legislature so that you can feel that there is that sisterhood. And so that in itself is another way for you to learn the tools and techniques to run for office, and to ask, how do I do this and how can I be successful? Or if I wasn't successful the first time, should I do it again? Because we have really wonderful elected leaders such as Tammy Duckworth, who lost her first election to Congress. And yet now she's a senator from Illinois. So I really believe that it is a risk when you take this leap of faith into running for office. And we hope to be there with a security blanket or some sort of, parachute for you so that you don't feel like you're doing it alone. And this is an opportunity for you to meet others who are thinking the same thing that you are and going through this very similar situations and asking the same kinds of questions. And so we hope to build that community so that people are less lonely in running for office.
That is so inspiring, Madeline, because to me, what you just described is what I would call a big boulder project, the kind of project that will have impact that will go beyond, beyond us living here, because it carries on as a legacy. And Chilling, I want to ask you, when you look back at your career and you have a lot more years ahead of you, what would you consider to be a big boulder project that you think will have lasting impact beyond your years in this nonprofit?
Well, I think, Karen, we discussed earlier, I think it's very, very important to work with other minority groups. And especially the Black Lives Matter. I think Asian Americans owe so much of their presence in this country to the Black struggle for freedom. And also for the Black business and also Hispanic business. And we work closely with them. And we just think it is so important that we consider as a minority together. The school district in Washington State has decided that Asians are not a student of color anymore. It just happened like a couple of days ago. Mm-hmm. So if we are not the color, people of color, what we are we white? So this kind of things kind of strike me. I say, wow, what is the identity of Asian Americans? So I think moving forward, we really, really want to work closely with other minority community and to make sure, we close the income gap. We close the wealth gap together. And JP Morgan, they have an issue like $30 billion to help Black and also Hispanic community. We applaud for their action. But also, we also send a message out, how about Asian Americans? We have been, our business has been affected tremendously. So think about that. So I think the power of emerging Americans standing up for Black Lives Matters, I think that sent a very, very clear message that we will work together and to make this community a better place.
Here, and Madeline, both of you are involved in so many different civic groups and boards. I'm actually reading all of your resumes made me tired and made me want to go and do more. It's kind of that tug of war. And I want to ask you, Tier, first, how do you balance your passion projects with your professional life? Because when I think about big boulder projects, I wonder what you consider to be something that is it 2020 or is there something else that you consider to be big boulder projects?
So 2020 Women on Boards is definitely one of them in terms of getting more women in leadership positions, as well as Asian Americans into leadership positions from the board level to the management team and so on. And I've loved hearing about in the political realm as well, Madeline, so that's, and Chilling, so that's really great. I would say two other things. One is around engaging men in the conversation of gender parity and gender equity, because the men in the majority group are still very much at the decision-making table, and we need them to be working alongside us, right, to move the needle on a gender equity. And then I would say the second thing is around mentoring and advocating and sponsoring younger professionals, younger Asian American professionals. And I know that, companies like Toyota is doing a whole lot of that, and engaging other companies as well in the leadership development that they do. So I would say, in addition to 2020 women on boards, I would say engaging men in the conversation, as well as mentoring and sponsoring younger professionals. In regards to balance, this is a work in progress for me. So I'm married with 4 boys. I have one in college, one in high school, one in middle school, and one in elementary school. I'll say that I remember all of their birthdays, and sometimes my husband does not. So anyway, I have great support from my husband as well. But, it's a work in progress because you never really have perfect balance. And so for me, there are a number of things that I've been working on in terms of my own personal transformation around how I work and how I live. So one of the things is really, prioritizing the things that are most important to me and that I'm most passionate about, and saying no to the things that are not as high priority for me. And sometimes that's hard, but I've been learning over the years to say no to some things. So that's one, learning to say no. The second thing is putting things on my calendar. So calendar management is, Madeline mentioned that earlier as well, so important. And if it's not on the calendar, it won't get done. Or another way to say it is, if it's on your calendar, it will get done. And so I put family time, one-on-one with each of my boys on the calendar, and then I commit to it and I stick with it, whether it be in the evenings or on the weekends. And I try not to let all the things that I'm passionate about get in the way of family time, as well as personal wellness time. That's been something that's been a struggle for me for years, whether it be exercising or sleep. That's something that I've gotten better at over the past few years or so. So I think, planning and be prepared, and just being really convicted around what's important to you and what's essential to you, and focusing on those things.
Great. We have 3 minutes, and I just want to go to Chillin and Madeline to give 1 minute quick nugget of advice to the API women that are on this call. Chillin, I'll go to you first since you have to leave, and then we'll wrap it up with Madeline at the high point.
Yes, I always like to close my remarks talking about the American dream. There's good definition of American dream. Life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability and achievement, regardless of social class or circumstances of birth. So I think especially during this COVID, we're just so tired. We have to take care of family, we have to take care of our career, so tired. But I really want people keep a positive thinking. I still believe in this country, no matter how people think about the democratic system, it's not the perfect, but we have no other options. So I really wish everybody can put the positive thinking to moving forward. And I especially want to thank Asian Chamber of Texas to put this together, and we can encourage each other and we move on. Thank you so much. And I have to host another event, so I have to move. Thank you so much for all of you. Thank you. Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you, Chilling. Madeline, can you just wrap it up with some inspirational words for the audience today?
Thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate the time. And, I think it's so important for us to really be our authentic selves. I mean, that is what I really believe when it comes to representation. Our founder, Norma Netta, has a saying that America is not a melting pot. And I believe in that, because we are not homogeneous, and we are what he likes to think of as a fabric, each of us woven together in our identities that create the United States of America. And I believe that means you don't have to give up who you are, your heritage, your ethnic identity to succeed. And so be proud of where you're from, be proud of what you represent, and those values will come out when you're out there doing your work. And that's what leaders are about, being authentically themselves. And I think, all of us and all of you have that opportunity to be that every day. So thank you so much for, leading in that charge.
Well, thank you all of you who have shared your time with us and your inspiring stories. And once again, thank you for the Asian Chamber of Texas for allowing me the pleasure of speaking to these wonderful women. I'm going to turn it back now to the host or hostess, as the case may be. Take care, ladies.
Wow, that was truly an engaging and thought-provoking discussion. Karen, thank you so much for facilitating this panel discussion, and I really appreciate each one of your time. And I myself enjoyed this, and I hope you all did the same. Well, moving on to our next panel discussion, the topic, Women STEAM Ahead panel, with this esteemed group of panelists. And I have the pleasure to introduce another esteemed moderator, Koshi Dhingra. Koshi Dhingra received an undergraduate degree from the National University of Singapore and a doctorate in science education from Teachers College, Columbia University. Her research focused on connecting formal and informal educational opportunities for over 20 years. She has years of experience teaching at the middle and high school levels and in teacher education program. She previously served as a director of the Science and Engineering Education Center at the University of Texas at Dallas. Following this, she founded talkSTEM in spring of 2015. I know I am making this bio, which was extremely long, a short one, so that we can have more discussion and dialogue with the panelists and of course with Koshi. I welcome Koshi Dhingra.
Thank you so much, Neha. It's so great to be here today. Welcome everybody to the Women STEAM Ahead panel discussion. I'm delighted to introduce our panel participants. I'm going to do so very briefly to address the issue of having very talented people here, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves in greater detail in just a few minutes. Our panel consists of diverse thought leaders coming from the arts, medicine, and finance. We're going to have a really invigorating discussion around some questions that I'll be asking them for about 40 minutes, and we'll have time for Q&A to close. I know that we have an equally varied audience today, and I'd love you all, as you hear us talk, to think about your questions, and it's okay to come from a really broad set of perspectives. We may not have answers for you, but that's the spirit of this panel discussion. In fact, in preparing for this, the panel and I had some stimulating conversation on how we see ourselves and our work in relation to how we perceive STEAM from our respective vantage points. So there's no singular answer, but I hope that we'll have a really interesting conversation, open up. I am a STEAM person, so I love questions. So let's open up to even more questions. So today on our panel, we have Dr. Jaya Kumar, Chief Medical Officer of Medical City McKinney, a 260-bed hospital where she is Chief Physician Advisor to the senior leadership team. We also have Jane Shane, who is the first female chair of the Dallas Summer Musical Board of Directors. And last but certainly not least, we have Julia Wada, who is Group Vice President for Strategy, Innovation, and Transformation at Toyota Financial Services. So before I get started, and I'll be asking each of the panelists to give a quick introduction of themselves, a little background on terms that I think we all toss around. I could spend a long time talking about this. I'm going to encapsulate in about a minute. What do we mean by terms like STEM and STEAM? So STEM was a term, science, technology, engineering, and math, coined by the National Science Foundation in the early part of this century. And then about 10 years later, the term STEAM, where the 8A stands for Arts and Humanities, was coined and made popular by John Mader, then director of the Rhode Island School of Design. So there's no formal definition. So I know that I speak to a lot of people about these terms, and I just want to make sure that our audience understands. It's really the spirit. The spirit is to integrate subjects, to be aware of the need to work across silos, to teach and to model innovation, to think critically, and to use engineering and technology creatively to solve real-world problems. So think about within yourself what happens when we add the A. By adding the A, I think we emphasize the need to draw on ethics, social and historical knowledge, and design principles. in order to solve big problems in our society and world, and in a wide variety of fields, including healthcare, technology, large businesses, small businesses, entrepreneurship, you name it. We need diversity of thought and experience. And we certainly need girls and women to be involved. We heard yesterday from Dean Adams in the keynote, and she gave a really interesting example of Gendered Innovations, a group at Stanford who looks at gender equity issues in relationship to something that we all take for granted, public transportation and design of seatbelts around different human body forms, whether you're pregnant, what size are you, things of that nature. So many of us are aware of knowledge gaps as another example in heart disease research, where because of a focus on male-centered symptoms of heart disease, there are knowledge gaps in diagnosis, treatment, and prevention. And finally, many of us read about the all-female spacewalk last year that was canceled because of something as simple as, oops, didn't have the right size spacesuit. So all kinds of things. So I want us to all have these kind of very broad and interesting topics in our mind. I know that the panel and I do, and certainly the audience, so you can kind of keep those questions coming and we can have an interesting discussion later. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists now to give us a quick 2-minute introduction. And please do include something unexpected about yourself. It is Friday afternoon after all. And also just a quick mention of your personal interpretation of the term STEAM. So let's get started with Jaya.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Koshi, for hosting this. I've been to the Women's Business Conference before, but this topic is just near and dear to my heart. Women in STEAM is just extraordinary thing to talk about and to work on for all of us. My name is Jaya Kumar, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer of a hospital. And I often get asked this question, what does a Chief Medical Officer do? So as compared or in contrast to the technology companies, the C-suites in healthcare have an additional member, and that member is the Chief Medical Officer, who's a physician. And essentially, the Chief Medical Officer directs everything and all things medical in the hospital. Because you may remember, the executives in the C-suite are not physicians. They know healthcare very well, but they're not physicians. For us to take care of a host of patients without a physician in the team would be unfair. So I make sure that every patient who walks through the hospital gets the best standard of care. And I also make sure that the staff in every department in the hospital feels supported and follows research-based medicine all through the course of their stay. So that's what I do. I also interact with communities to make sure they understand what their role in healthcare is. And I am an advisor to all the nurses, pharmacists, anybody who's in the healthcare sector to give them opinions and strategies about how to do best patient care. So that's my story on my introduction, but you said ask something personal. I have a unique experience with STEAM. I was born in a small town in India. My parents are both professors. My mother is a professor in Hindi, a language, and my father is a professor in botany. So I had both arts and humanities and science in my own house. And growing up, it was nothing other than juggling both of these together. So my typical day would start in the morning. My dad would say, how do you classify living beings? Is it kingdom, phylum, classes, family, genus, species? And then on lunch, we would call rice Oryza sativa, which is the scientific name, or wheat as rotis as Triticum aestivum. So this is how we learned. If we ate a mango, we used to call it a fleshy fruit, which is a drupe. And on the other hand, my mom made sure that we recited poems written by the great poets of India, including Mahadevi Verma, Harivansh Rai Bachchan. And we went to bed listening to stories by Rabindranath Tagore or Premchand. So it was all a mixture of things. And I couldn't tell you if I would be a better person if I had these two sets of people shaping my life in a way they did. So that's my unique experience with STEAM. And I really appreciate both sides. And I think they all play an equal role in shaping your personality. So thank you for choosing this topic.
Thank you, Jaya. Jane, let's hear from you.
Well, thank you, Koshi. I'm kind of a living example of technology and art merging together. I had a 30-year career inside of Texas Instruments, where understanding the power of STEM is in the fabric. And for decades, we've had a focus on helping young girls understand how to stay in the tracks of math and science so that they can be working in the world of technology. And so I feel very well schooled in that. And one thing I learned is that in the time of my own career, the number of job opportunities in STEM related fields has just exploded. And it will continue to grow and grow and grow because technology is in everything. And they are generally well-paying, transformative work jobs. They're wonderfully rewarding. So there's so many good reasons to understand the opportunity space of STEM. And when I retired from TI 3 years ago, I had been on the board of Dallas Summer Musicals, and it's been the case that I am now the board chair, the first female chair of an arts organization. So I'm able to kind of practice what I preach about art being an important part of our future. And DSM is an organization in transformation too. And we'll talk more about that. But the fun fact about me that I thought about sharing is that, like so many people, I'm watching The Crown season 4, and I got to the episodes about Margaret Thatcher meeting the Queen. And it was a very interesting, I know this is fictional history, but it's a very interesting depiction about a disadvantaged woman meeting a very advantaged woman, same age, having to find the way to work together for the good of England. So that's just a fun fact that's real for me.
Thank you. And I'm planning on catching up on season 4 of The Crown next week. So I look forward to that. Julia, please introduce.
Good afternoon, everyone. So happy to be here with you. I'm Julia Wada, and I work for Toyota Financial Services. And Toyota Financial Services is the #1 auto lender in the US for 8 years running now. We provide leases and loans to buy cars through our dealers. And we also provide our dealers with financing to run their business. So that's where I work. My title, as Koshi mentioned, is Group Vice President, Strategy, Innovation, and Transformation. And I report to the CEO. I'm part of the executive committee. But what my team does is a few things. One, we work with people across the company on our strategy, overall strategy development. We lead company-wide projects, basically, enterprise projects. And then we have a kind of internal incubator function, or internal R&D. So I have a team that works on pilots and proof of concepts for new products, services, and businesses. So a lot of great stuff that is changing every day. And I started my career in aerospace after getting a Bachelor of Science in Engineering many years ago. And after working a few years in aerospace, I realized what I really enjoyed was really the program management or the project delivery, working with other people to get things done. And so it was the 80s, and I decided to go back to business school. I went to the MIT Sloan School. And there I focused on management of technology, international management, and strategy. And coming out of school there, I landed a job with Toyota, and it's 30 years ago in January. And it was an internship program, kind of a rotational development program. And I'm here at Toyota 30 years later because I have had a chance to grow and learn and move around into many different areas, and feel like I've been able to make an impact. But most importantly, I've been able to work with great people. And so I'm lucky to have spanned many different areas such as pricing and product planning, as well as human resources and IT, and my current role. And in terms of something unexpected, I mentioned I have an engineering degree. For some reason, people are surprised when they learn that I ran HR for 15 years. Or if they met me during my HR tenure and they learned I was an engineer, they're like, oh, that's odd. But I think that speaks to some of what we'll be talking about today. And my other fun fact is just that I have discovered YouTube exercise videos during the pandemic, and that's been really, really helpful for me.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks so much for sharing. And yeah, no, that is not a way that I use YouTube, and I have a feeling that I probably will not be doing that, but good for you. All right, so let's talk about innovation, because I mean, STEAM and innovation, right? They seem to be going hand in hand. It's a quality that frequently comes to mind, and it's a very important quality for our planet in a variety of ways. How do each of you see your work as being innovative? Like, how important do you think this quality should be for people also early in their careers? Because we have all ages listening in. So for you where you are, and for people early in their careers. Maybe each of you can just, maybe we can start with Jaya, just make it, and I'd love to hear from each of you about, from your vantage point.
Sure. For healthcare, Koshi, this has been the year of innovation, as you may know. With the pandemic in place, we've learned so many things and invented so many things in record-breaking manners. Leading in crisis involves innovation. It involves inspiration, and it involves influencing. And I place innovation on top because as healthcare providers, we prepared for the pandemic after the pandemic began. So it led to more innovation because nothing like this had ever happened. We never expected that something like this would happen ever in our lifetime. So when we saw the surge coming and we started to plan how our hospital capacity would look like if thousands of patients were pouring in, we left no effort in finding every nook and corner of the hospital where we could house patients. So just creating additional capacity in the hospital, how to manage a surge of patients with medications, staffing capacity, like our shortage of nurses. How would we do something called team-based nursing, where one nurse gets supported by other nurses to take care of more patients? Similar things with physicians. This was just in planning. Remember therapeutics part, we had record-breaking events of everything. Look at the vaccine that we talk about these days. This messenger RNA vaccine is groundbreaking technology that healthcare has never seen. And not only technology is groundbreaking, we saw it in record timing, like within 8 months, we saw a vaccine come out. Recently, Pfizer approved or rolled out the vaccine, which is under FDA approval. So it's been innovation all across for healthcare, not just in operations, but also in technology innovations, like using ventilators for more than one patient. It's been, I think innovation is the most important part that this crisis has taught us.
Absolutely. Jane, I mean, and absolutely with the pandemic, I mean, for sure, I mean, we all probably have no shortage of stories, but certainly in the medical field. And thank you for all that you do, Jaya. Yes. In the last 6 to 8 months, I mean, yeah, I don't think any of us could have imagined what we are seeing today. But Jane, from your standpoint, please.
I have high respect for your work, Jaya. Thank you. Well, Dallas Summer Musicals, if you're not aware, is the organization that presents Broadway shows in Dallas. And there are no Broadway shows happening now. So innovation is a matter of survival for us. Since March, we, like so many other theaters across the nation and world, have had no revenue since March. And we still do not know exactly when shows will return because of COVID restrictions. So being innovative means for the staff and the board around DSM is adaptive. Every meeting that we have is the conversation. So now what should we do? So now what should we do to get things done, to make things safe, to bring in what revenue we might be able to put together in the meantime. So there have been efforts of innovating supplemental revenue streams for DSM, virtual concerts and other things that have produced some help, being innovative in how we engage the patrons and the donors and the subscribers so that they have the information they need and know how to deal with ticketing and all sorts of things. I lead the board of directors. So there's been a real challenge of keeping morale in check, keeping them informed, keeping them doing committee work in an innovative way that can be done while the theater's dark. There's still work to do. And just keeping momentum going, collaborations with other arts organizations at the local level and at the national level, because there's federal funding that might be available to us. So a lot of adaptive work has been important.
Thank you, Jane. Julia, you talked about your internal R&D, so I'm sure that a lot of different connection points with this concept of innovation. Please do share.
Yeah, well, and actually at Toyota, one of our core values is Kaizen. And some people have interpreted that as continuous improvement, but if you look at the two characters, it's actually change for the better. And we really think about innovation in all its forms, from small incremental improvement all the way through to big transformational change. And I really think it's kind of core to who we are at Toyota, and also one of the reasons that we can continue to be successful. And I know it's cliche, but change really is the only constant. And and I feel like whether it's individuals or companies, we have to constantly be reinventing ourselves, learning, growing, reinventing ourselves. And so I think innovation is important at every point in your career. We're always, I think people are always looking for somebody who's going to help us either do things differently or better, right? If you're going to keep doing things the same way, you're not going to advance in your career. And actually, one of my favorite quotes, and I've had it on my desk since early in my career, is from Benjamin Franklin. He said, when you're finished changing, you're finished. So I've always liked that one. And yeah, my team, we have a small team, dedicated focus on trying to do things differently, faster, and also to learn things that ultimately then kind of the mothership can take on. And sometimes it's hard because, as a big company, we have some set ways of doing things, but we're always trying to push on that.
Thank you so much. And and I know that as a former professor and teacher, when we think of our youth, it's hard because if you think back early in your career, there you are, eager beaver, want to do things right. And I know for a lot of young people early in their careers, or just as they start imagining what their careers could look like, this is challenging. There, of course, our young people are often, they have a lot of great tools for innovation and change, but at the same time, they're not sure exactly how to express that. So we'll talk a little bit later about our youth, whether whether you yourself are a youthful person listening, or whether you have children and you're trying to, as we know, for the next generation, the work that they're likely to do professionally may not even currently exist. So definitely is an exciting time, but also kind of, somewhat challenging as you try and figure out, I would imagine, I'm trying to imagine myself being young again in my early 20s, how to be strategic, how to not step on any toes, and how to still be able to express yourself. But that's something that I'd like us to keep in the back of our minds, and maybe we'll circle back to that in a little bit. But since this is Women's STEAM Ahead, let's talk a little bit about gender equity issues that you may have seen in your work context. Let me start with you, Jaya. How does gender play a role in healthcare, in your opinion?
Thank you. Healthcare has traditionally been very siloed. So you don't think of healthcare until you fall sick or you have to go to a doctor. So our industry is kind of siloed, but we have our own problems. I'll take you back to in history. American Medical Association has some statistics that I'll share with you, but 1849 was the first time a woman physician graduated from a US medical school. And schools existed long before that. So Elizabeth Blackwell was the first physician who was woman, and we still celebrate her and we call it a Women Physician Day. There's no Man's Physician Day. But over a period of time, we've increased the number of women physicians. In late 1800s and early 1900s, we had more. And in the past century, we really have raced ahead. And in medical schools, you'll see 50% are women and 50% are men. But the gender disparity goes further than that. When women have to choose specialties, when we have to choose subspecialties, like whether I'm going to become a surgeon or I'm going to become a neurosurgeon or a cardiologist or a GI doctor, that's when you start thinking about your family, your life, because that's the peak of your career as well as it's the peak of your childbearing age group. So at that point, that influences your decision making. Women tend to take more less taxing specialties like internal medicine or pediatrics or women's. Men take more taxing specialties, neurosurgery, and more flashy ones too. And eventually, I think the gender disparity grows as you go on and get more advanced. So if you look at statistics, although women make 50% of the workforce in physicians, but only 10% get to the leadership roles, like dean of universities or CEOs or CMOs, and the pool gets smaller and smaller. And there is something called, we call it pipeline leakage, because we drop out, we feel exhausted. From childbearing and having children and raising kids to doing everything. And there, as you know, there is, although we want to have an equal distribution of work in our households, but it doesn't end up that way. So women take more of the brunt of the household work and they choose less taxing specialties, part-time work, and eventually that disparity grows. So that's, and it's getting better, but again, it's not where we want to be.
Thank you, Jay. In fact, it reminded me, I read some articles recently in the paper about, just particularly with this pandemic, how much of how many steps back women are taking just because of some of the issues that you're describing. Typically in most households, women being the primary kind of really caregiver. And so having to take steps back in their careers just to prioritize on, family life, children, and so forth. So definitely something important for us all to consider. Jane, let me ask you, so as the first female board chair at DSM, I've read a lot about, perceptions and the importance of managing perceptions, particularly for women leaders. So how do you think about this as you kind of navigate the commonplace image perceptions of women being, decisive versus quote unquote pushy or bossy? Is that something that ever comes to your mind, and how do you navigate that?
It is always in my mind in what I think is a healthy way. And it stems from spending, long time at TI, which is a very male company. And so day after day, you're showing up and you are in the minority. So I really get that feeling. And I've learned over time that managing perceptions is a very nuanced thing, and it takes time and effort. And so my personal approach to this, and it is very true also at DSM, where I'm a leader in a transformative time at DSM, is to show up every meeting very well prepared so that I'm not struggling at all with the content or the substance of the conversation. I've got that down. And then what I can pay attention to in the meeting is the people dynamic. And I want to understand how people are connecting to me and to each other. And I want to really understand the dynamic of what's happening there and who's being received and who's being received in a tentative way and so on. And where I really strive to connect is for people seeing the authentic Jane. I listened to the previous panel and the word authentic came up a lot. And I really believe that's part of it, because when people see what I'm truly bringing into the conversation or the meeting or the project, then the stereotypes start to dispel. They may get a visual impression of me, but when they hear me talk and add value, that's when the kind of truth takes over, right? The truth is coming out. So I want them to see that I'm good at solving problems, that I'm good at bringing order. out of chaos. And now those are very helpful skills to have. So then the walls come down.
That's, yeah, that's really, yeah, insightful and thoughtful. Thank you. Julia, so you're in the world of financial positions. We obviously, everyone's read a lot of articles about the numbers when it comes to decision making and corporate, not just Toyota, but just in general in the national, international landscape, really, C-level positions and women, et cetera. So how do you see, just from your vantage point, gender equity issues in the world of financial services, decision makers in the corporate landscape? Please tell us what you think.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a lot of studies, and hope maybe some of you are familiar with the McKinsey Lean In Women in the Workplace study. They've been doing it for 5 years now, and it recently just came out. And financial services, based on their data, is sort of what I would call middle of the pack. So what I mean by that is, in terms of the pipeline that Jaya mentioned, at entry level, financial services is about 51% female. And the range there of other companies or industries goes from about 30% to 75%, 30% technology. Healthcare was at the high end, 75%. And then at the C-suite level for financial services, it goes to about 26%. And then the range there is 10% to 34%. So middle of the pack, I think similar to, honestly, most of the areas, whether it's business, government, most other areas, progress in terms of gender equity there's been some, but we still have a long ways to go, right? When you think about how do we make those pipeline numbers equal at every level. So, and like you said, unfortunately with this pandemic, some people are calling it a she session. I don't know if you've heard that term. Now, for me at TFS, my personal experience is today as part of the executive team, I'm 1 out of 3 women. Out of 10, so that's 30%. Our CEO very much values diversity of thought. I think we have actually a very diverse group around the table. And we talked about innovation earlier. We really strongly believe that diverse representation is really important for diversity of thought, but more importantly, creating an inclusive environment where people are bringing feel heard and engaged and bringing their best ideas is really more important. So we've been on a journey and where we're continuing to work on increasing representation, but more importantly, those other things, those soft aspects. And I think what's really important is things like really active mentoring and sponsorship, particularly for women to advance.
Thank you. So kind of building off of what you just said, what you all just said, it's interesting. I was in a different one of these virtual sessions a couple of weeks ago.
They're all blurring together.
It's all, it's like, wait, who am I speaking to now? No. But anyway, somebody brought up the point that, women are actually known for really being great at building strong relationships, something that you also talk about, Jane, as being very important as a leader, obviously. In a way, it's kind of a engineering mindset, like systems thinking. How do we get people to work together? How do we listen? How do we build up? So if there is, not stereotyping, but let's say that there's some truth to the fact that many women are just really good, girls and young women and older women are good at relationship building and all of that entails. So in a way, what can we say to, let's say, your mentees, the younger women listening in terms of how they may be well equipped to succeed in a wide variety of careers, whether it's the business sector, the arts, the medical, you name it, entrepreneurship? Like what can they think about themselves as their skill set? Because I do know that there's a lot of intimidation. There's an intimidation factor as I speak to a lot of women around terms like STEM, STEAM, and leading, particularly when you're young, but at any age. So what advice do you have, I guess the question is, for younger girls and young women who are kind of dreaming what lies ahead for themselves? No particular order, just whoever would like to.
I can try. Again, I refer to healthcare because that's where I'm from, but there have been studies that have shown that women physicians their patients have better outcomes and they die less and they stay healthier longer. And we spend more time with our patients. We are more compassionate. And then that's the given, and it's proven through research. So what I would say is, if women continue to embrace the arts and humanities together with the science and technology, that's the best combination you can get to be a great leader and a great innovator.
Thank you, Jess. Jane, Julia, either one have anything to add for advice for younger people who are listening in?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that, one, there's a ton of opportunity, right? And it can look very different. And so you know, there's a lot of opportunity. What you bring is important, and we really need more women. And I love what Jai just said. What I was thinking about is we need more women who are going to come in and help us think more from a systems point of view. Really, they're great at helping connect the dots and connecting the people and kind of inspiring them to execute together. The other thing they bring is, I think, more of a kind of humanistic leadership. And when you're looking at how technology is impacting so many things, we really need people to be coming in with that ethical view, making sure how things get implemented and affect the world are in as positive a way as possible. So I think women have a lot to add, and we need women.
Mm-hmm. I would only add one thing we learned inside of TI is that it's typically in middle school when you really start getting into the tracks of courseware that has you in a math and science track or not, with emphasis. And sometimes there are barriers, as you said, of intimidation or lack of comfort. And so we began to fund programs that really work to build confidence in entry-level math and science, physics topics, so that they just felt more solid entering those courses and were able to work through the content with greater confidence and ease. And that made a huge difference, having them in the tracks so that when they really graduate with degrees that put them into technology fields, they were able to secure the jobs we're talking about.
Speaking of, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So speaking of our youth again, so I know many people listening have, you know, kids of all ages, or, you know, some of them may even be in college themselves. I know the STEAM education sort of movement, if you will, is gaining some momentum in K-12 schools. How do you think, as you look in your own fields, you know, how they're preparing students for the workforce, in your opinion? So some of what you said, like, but are there any particular ways, keeping in mind that STEAM programming in different spaces can look very different, right? There is, like, I kicked off this meeting with a comment that there's really no specific consensus on what a STEAM program looks like or what STEAM is, but let's just go with this more general feel that it's the spirit of the intentionality of, you know, cutting across these silos of these borders, of making sure kids have, and students of all ages have, exposure to, you know, questions and methods of addressing questions that come from different disciplinary backgrounds, whether it comes from the arts and humanities, or it comes from the sciences and the technology. How do you think that shifts the workforce, whether in your particular field or in general? I'm just curious, what do you think of that?
You know, Koshi, I really like how you're broadening our thinking about STEM and STEAM, because maybe what I would say is we got to help our people feel like when they pick a STEM, like a STEM track, that it's not narrowing their opportunities to just certain types of jobs. And so I think one of the things that it's preparing people to do is actually have a wide variety of jobs. So in automotive, for example, it's a super exciting time. There's lots of change going on. We've got all kinds of new competitors and technology, and, you know, whether it's autonomous vehicles or, you know, interacting with our customers in different ways with mobile apps and things like that. STEM is all over the place. So we've got, you know, just, I think maybe I'll just give a couple examples of the types of jobs because they're so different, right? Of course, we have automotive engineers, but we also have scientists who are working on, what are the best materials so that our vehicles have, whether it's internal materials for our internal systems or the engines and vehicle themselves, so that it's great for customers, but also has a minimal environmental impact, right? We also have, cars are now computers on wheels. So obviously we have a lot of technologists that are helping us. Everybody knows we have engineers, right, in terms of building the cars, but we have a lot of engineers working on other things like our processes and making sure that we're able to work efficiently or from a logistics point of view. And we have lots of artists too. We've got art involved in automotive design. We've got art involved in our websites. And we've got a lot of data and analytics, so a lot of math going on. We have more data than we've ever had before to be able to provide our customers with better products. So there's, so many different types of opportunities. And I think that's what the STEAM curriculum is really helping our people, our students prepare for. And I think, starting early and helping them see the breadth of opportunities versus, narrowing them is really important.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, no, I'm interested in hearing what you and Jaya and Jane have to say, but what you said reminded me of, I forget what, it was some federal article that I was reading, some, one of those reports, but they had an interesting statement about sort of, it was pretty recent, maybe it was last year or the year before, sort of STEM in non-STEM occupations. So I think, we all tend to have, or many of us tend to have a certain bunch of occupations in mind when you say the term STEM. It involves computer programming or lab coats or things of that nature. And yet STEM skills, particularly, we spent some time yesterday talking about the importance of data. It doesn't matter whether you're an art gallery or, a summer musical, you're definitely interested in data analysis and questions around your data. So just even using data as kind of a conceptual kind of organizer, pretty much any business, any startup or any large entity, is STEM/STEAM. And I think what the A does is kind of just put a little bit of a spotlight on that. I mean, I think for myself, I was a middle and high school teacher back in the early 90s. And I think teachers like myself and others that I knew always enjoyed making connections like that. But I think it's good to have that A spotlighted just to kind of highlight that fact. Jane or Jaya, did you have anything to add about, from your standpoint, how you see this kind of increasing emphasis on STEAM education for young people, how it sort of relates to the workforce?
Yes, so I spent a lot of time in a technology company where we were very comfortable spinning fast and having the latest and fastest this or that, and actually building some of it, to a music theater that's in a geography that is economically disadvantaged. So the technology enablement of the geography of the music hall, of the people who live in the neighborhoods is completely different. And maybe you've heard the term digital divide, the haves and the have-nots, that COVID really illuminated, because that all of a sudden you needed connectivity and bandwidth to do schoolwork. And it's always been true that you've needed internet to do healthcare and school and find a job and things, but COVID just exacerbated all of that. And so when we think about this at DSM, it's about equity and access. It's about equity. How can we argue the case and advocate for greater technology enablement into these areas that do not have as much as others? And then access into our offerings into the community so that people are enriched. And we are an art form. We offer education programs in addition to the productions that we have in the music hall. So there's a real focus on engagement and inclusion in bringing the neighborhood in, students and educators, so that they're enriched. They have a time for the art form to be transformative in their day and to do a lot of support for their work.
Thanks, Jane. So Jaya, what does it look like for you in the medical world? I don't know if you have an opportunity to mix with any young medical students, or if you see any change coming down the pike?
So, this is funny because we as doctors have been really living in like a few years behind the rest of the world because we don't use technology as much as we should, especially in terms of our like skills and expertise. We never thought that seeing patients over internet would be an option. There were some specialties who were doing it, like psychiatry and neurology. They would see patients on WebEx or Zoom and provide something called telehealth. We never thought telehealth would be an option for other specialists. But during COVID, we found out that this was an option, and this is a very valid option to keep both yourself and your patients safe. So definitely the younger generation is better equipped with more technology, more knowledge. And I'm hoping that going forward, our industry will incorporate those learnings that we've had this year to go forward. And it may become a norm that we use telehealth for a lot of specialties. And this would expand physician access to the remote areas of the country where you lack physicians.
No, thank you, Jaya. I mean, yeah, tele anything, right? Who would have thought we'd have been, if you had asked me in Jan or Feb that we'd have been able to do what we're doing through Zoom or, your choice of platform, right? None of us would have believed it. So absolutely. And it's a great point about increasing physician access. I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, I do think like in the world of education, certainly a lot of what we're doing will stick. Hopefully down the road when we can be physically together again, but still a lot of the innovation, what they say, necessity is the mother of, invention. So maybe this extremely trying time for all of us will have some silver linings for fields like medicine, education, and beyond. Before I move on to the next question, people in the audience, please feel free to pop in any questions you have. We're going to be wrapping up fairly soon. So if you do have questions or even comments about, we'd love to hear from you about how you see STEAM and innovation play out in your particular world, whether it's as a small business owner, or it's as a parent, it's as, a STEM practitioner, you name it. It'd be interesting for us to hear from you as well. So I've got a few questions about that letter A, just because STEAM is a little bit newer as an acronym than STEM. Let me start with you, Julia. You mentioned to me just a few days ago when we were preparing for this that you didn't feel like you were really a STEM person or a STEAM person, even though you have an engineering degree, right? And you worked at Lockheed Martin, but because it was from a while ago. And I think many people feel this way, especially those that don't even major in a STEM program at college. And we had a great conversation and I enjoyed it. I think you shifted even within that conversation a tiny bit in your view. And I think a lot of people would find it interesting to know how you now think about your identity. And I use this word aware of its, it's a big concept, but, we all have multiple identities, right? We may be sisters, moms, leaders in different fields. But your identity, and I'd love you all, whoever's listening, to think about it. What is your identity currently? What is your relationship with math, science, STEM, STEAM, you pick whatever you want to call it. And then I'm going to ask you, Julia, share a little bit about your thinking about your identity as a STEM or a non-STEM person, a little bit about how you were thinking about it when we had that conversation just a few days ago.
Yeah, that was a fun conversation. And so certainly it's a part of who I am. But the reason I said I'm not a STEM person is I did what I tell my kids never to do. And that's I assumed that coming with that STEM label was that sort of requirement that you had a certain degree or that you were in a certain job. And, that's so I was falling victim to a very similar a problem, I think, sometimes with STEM. And I think sometimes it can feel kind of narrow and exclusive, when really I think STEM and STEAM is very expansive. And like for me, sure, I don't use, you know, my drafting skills that I learned as a mechanical engineer. I haven't used those for many, many years, but things like problem solving and systems thinking and the ability to translate technical issues into, you know, layperson language, those kinds of things I've used all throughout my career, whether I was working in when I headed up IT or when I headed up HR. So those, I think it has provided for me that kind of broad foundation. And so it is a part of my identity. And for me, it's shifted the way I think about how we use that STEM label. And you know, that's why part of what I've been trying to say today is to really broaden that. So, and I like what you're doing there. Actually, one of my colleagues at work shared a definition of STEM with me since we last talked. They said it's succeeding in today's emerging marketplace. And I don't know where that came from, but STEM, I really like that. So that's how I'm changing my thinking.
Wow, that was really good, Julia. I agree with all of that. I think the way I frame up myself is much more using the strengths finders language, understanding your 5 strengths, which was totally eye-opening for me a long time ago, because inside my strengths are some skills, natural abilities that make me good in math and science and analytics and things like that. So that's why, you know, there's high affinity to STEM courseware. And then there are other parts of my strengths that make me happy doing other things, that make me enjoy doing other things. So I don't, you know, I'm much more about the 5 strengths that I believe I have and using them into work. That's how I tend to frame myself.
Thanks, Jane. Jaya, so I know as a physician who trained in internal medicine, the connections to STEM are obvious, right? I assume you were pretty good at math and science when you were a kid. But I wonder if, you know, where you sit now, if you see the A for arts and humanities as having any particular significance in what you do, on your profession, and if so, how?
Not many people know that there is an emerging subject called medical humanities. And that's essentially a conversation around medicine and its engagement with humanities, social sciences, health policy, patient experience, education. You know, it makes you see a patient as a whole person. Science and technology kind of point towards an inanimate object, but humanities make you see a person as a whole person, not just a patient. You know, all of us have shared experiences, but all of us are individuals and unique. One patient with cancer may not have the same experience as the other patient with cancer. Everybody has different priorities in life. So for a healthcare provider to see that person as an individual and a whole person, arts and humanities are at the center of their minds. You know, we want to teach medical students enrichment of language and thoughts so they can communicate well. Not many doctors are good communicators, you may have seen. They have a stern face and they come across as blunt, but that's not what we want. Time and again, research has shown us that patients have better outcomes if they have a better experience in the healthcare system. If they perceive healthcare system as a hardship, they're not going to engage with it. Long gone are the days when physician told the patient what to do and they did it. Now it's shared decision making. We make decisions together. I'm not paternalistic. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm giving you options and then you choose what you want to do because you're an individual. So this is how arts and humanities are in part and parcel of every healthcare practitioner. And more emphasis on medical schools embracing arts and humanities, and that's called medical humanities. Very good question.
Thank you, Jaya. Yeah, absolutely. We've all gone to a doctor's, and I mean, I would love for all of them to know about medical humanities, that's for sure. You remind me, actually, you know, one of the people I collaborated with here was this woman who comes from the arts, is an expert, and who actually teaches, I believe, at UT Southwestern and in New York, she teaches medical interns, and she uses artworks to refine their observation skills and for them to have that ability to really see, I think what you're talking about, see the person, right? As well as obviously the expert, the reason that we go to the doctor for, we want that expert knowledge, but we also want them to see us, and that leads to better treatment, et cetera, right? Because so many things we missed. And she actually trains these interns using her expertise as an artist and an art historian. So I think the connections between art and medicine and probably lots of other fields are tremendous.
Yeah, remember the ethical dilemmas we have on a day-to-day basis and end-of-life conversations. They all require arts and humanities. If you don't possess those skills, you're not doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. And that's, you know, sort of tying back to sort of my own personal kind of area of work in education. And what I'm trying to do now with talkSTEM is to really invite girls who don't see themselves in this landscape of STEM or STEAM, and to say, you know what, just in your everyday life, whether you play sports or whether you know, like baking or gardening or, you know, listening to music or playing an instrument, you name it, right? The world is a messy place, and there's lots of intersections between STEM and art just in everyday life. And if we can somehow highlight them and show that they are connected, and bottom of everything is we are people, we are human. We may happen to have chosen to go into a highly technical field or not, or something else in between, but we can only make those connections as people. And so highlighting that also, I think, empowers all of us, women and other underrepresented groups when it comes to STEAM. So that's something that I know that I spend a lot of my time kind of designing. And also thinking about the term engineer, something came to mind when someone was saying something. That term engineer today is so important. Engineering curricula have gone up so tremendously in the last 10 or 15 years, which is fantastic. But a new term that I heard about is learning engineer. And if you think about, and I sometimes see myself now, a new definition, a reinvention of myself. And I think it's kind of fun that the times we live in, that we can keep reinventing ourselves. It makes life so much more fun and interesting and exciting, is to create sort of ecosystems of learning opportunities for kids and teachers and community educators and corporate mentors, because we're all in this together. I mean, if you look ahead to our young people, we're all kind of working, whether it's through the Dallas Summer Musicals or through certainly healthcare or through being a corporate mentor or a teacher or so on and so forth, or a policymaker. You know, we're all in it together. I feel like if we can approach it, if we can share our perspectives, it does make it a lot more messy, right? It is nice and tempting to put things in little boxes because those boxes just look so nice and tidy. But we live in a world where we have the tools to get past the boxes. And I think that's what this conversation is all about. So I think we have about 3 minutes to wrap up. And I'm just going to ask each of you just very quickly, 30 seconds or so, if you have any last words for those listening, whether they're keeping in mind, whether they're students, small business owners, going through, obviously we're all going through different kinds of challenges with the current pandemic, anything that you'd like them just to keep in mind as they navigate whatever lies ahead for them. It could be reiterating something you've already said, or just something else that you haven't had a chance to say anything about.
I'll start. So I would just say we all have to be lifelong learners now, and I think also supporting each other. And I think one place we can do that is to help people see, and especially our young people see, all the opportunities, those broad opportunities out there when you have a STEAM foundation of education. And also that there's so much more diversity in terms of the role models, like the people that are doing STEM. It's, there's a growing number of them and they're growing diversity. Right? If we help people see that, I think that would be good for all the STEAM related areas.
Thanks, Julia.
I agree with Julia. I mean, in this pandemic, everything has been different. I've seen nurses holding hands at the bedside of the patients who are dying because they can't be with their families. They're praying with them. There are chaplains around the room. There are nurses who can't take it with the scenes in the room, and they go in their break rooms and burst out in tears. So I've seen the technology side and I've seen the arts and humanities side both come together and just heroic deeds from all across the world. This is just exemplary, and it brought our profession to the limelight, all for the right reasons. Although I didn't wish it to happen this way, we felt like heroes, and they are heroes, the people who are on the front lines working every day. You won't know how wearing an N95 for 12 hours straight looks like. I mean, it's just unimaginable, the amount of trauma and the amount of mental distress that we've seen through this pandemic. So I would say be persistent, continue to combine STEM and arts together, and be human in your approach in whatever you do, because we are all humans. We make mistakes, but we learn from our mistakes.
Thank you,
I would simply say to be a champion of technology in your family, in your school, in your workplace, in everywhere, because it is so important for everything that we do.
Thank you all for joining me today. This has been a wonderful conversation. We're now at time, so I'm going to hand it over back to whoever's taking over, and thank you all for allowing us to have this great conversation.
And thank you, Koshi, and thank you, ladies. You guys were amazing. Hello, everyone. I'm Susan Phillips. I'm the president of the Asian Chamber of Texas here in Dallas. And I hope you guys have had, I feel like inspired by both of these panel discussions, one on the civic leadership, and as well as this esteemed, no pun intended, panel on STEAM as well. And, the interesting thing about, the common thread with all of these conversations, even from day one, our conference brought about the human element of every single thing that we do. Innovation, humanity drives innovation. And, you can't ignore the engineering aspect. Why do we have engineering? Why do we have innovation? It's all just to make life easier and for us to be able to connect with one another and make it that much more robust and meaningful. But one thing that we realize in all of these talks, that there's so much disparity and gaps in all of these areas. And the one good thing that we can get from this is that all of these ladies, they're champions of change, and they're trailblazers in their own areas in fields of study. And the intention behind, the chamber, our chamber, is to be an agent of change as well. And we do that through our programming. So, we will keep bringing these types of programs to you, and, keep bringing very honest conversations, because that is very important. We will never get anywhere unless we have these honest, fruitful conversations about where we are. We can't get to where we need to be if we can't talk about where we are. So thank you all for your contribution today, and I appreciate you guys so much. As we wrap up the session, I just want to invite you guys to continue, our audience to continue engaging with us. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what you want to see going forward and want to hear about going forward. So before I close the session, I just want to say a quick thank you to all of our partners for their continued support throughout the year. Dallas College, Parkland Hospital, DFW Airport, Texas Instruments, Coca-Cola Southwest Beverages, Toyota, Southwest Airlines, DART, Encore, and Visit Dallas. Well, lastly, I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving next week, and I pray you will all stay safe and healthy during this crazy time. And until next time, goodbye and God bless.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.